we are going to be left behind.
We being the United States.
Correct. I like America. For all of its faults, I still like it a lot. I am an American. My kids are Americans. I like it here. It's nice. I want to stay. But I don't seem to be allowed to be doing that. I'm not being given the opportunity to do that. And there are lots of countries, China you mentioned, Canada, Germany, the Czech Republic, they're all going ahead of us. Dr. Jan Ulich is running an excellent institute inside Prague, okay, in the Czech Republic. I think the actual name of the town is Res. He just got a huge amount of a very special salt called flib. A huge amount.
Flib?
Flib. It's shorthand for lithium fluoride, beryllium difluoride in a very special ratio. He just got thousands of kilos of this stuff, highly enriched. He basically got it for free from the United States government. They gave it away. Like,
duh.
Duh. Right, exactly. Duh. It's killing me that we just gave it away and that we're not being permitted to do the research here. We're literally not being permitted to do the research here. They just gave it away. The other interviewer before and stuff mentioned that they want to destroy the uranium-233. We actually have a very special isotope of uranium called uranium-233. It is as a direct result of thorium. And they want to destroy it. And the people in the thorium community are like, what are you doing? Don't do that. It's very rare. It's a very rare isotope of uranium, and it is very, very useful, and it's very cool for a number of different reasons. Not just as a cool fissile isotope, okay? There's a number of different technical reasons why it's very interesting. And they're about to destroy it. What are you doing? Stop this.
Okay, one of the things I'm interested in here is, you've mentioned a number of times the things that you can't mention to us because it's patent pending or you haven't. I'm sure you as Dr. Boyd are not the only person who has got intellectual property in his or her mind.
That's true.
Or So coming back again, when we talk about a united thorium community, I would imagine that you and several of the other prominent scientists, I would ask you to name them because I don't, are competitors and are also racing. So can you address that a little bit of where competition plays within this community?
Sure.
And who some of the researchers are?
That's the spirit of competition. That's the spirit of free market economics. There's nothing wrong with competition, particularly at this juncture. Why? Because you're talking about the entire planet, 7-point-something billion people of market share, okay? So there's plenty of room for competition. There are innumerable ways in which companies can collaborate. Each company has its own strengths. Those strengths can be manipulated and fashioned into operating agreements, into MOUs, into all sorts of different ways in which two people or two entities can collaborate in some sort of joint venture fashion. Sure.
What's an MOU?
Memorandum of Understanding. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. That said, I speak regularly with Dr. David LeBlanc, okay? We're trying to put something together that will make everybody happy. That's great. That's awesome. We can join forces.
Okay, but does Dr. David LeBlanc have his own company, just
Absolutely,
like you're going to have Avalite?
Yes.
So is it the two companies that are doing a joint venture?
Sure. We're not doing it yet. Okay, we're not doing it.
But when you
I would like to.
Would it be a joint venture between your company and his company?
Sure, in some fashion.
Okay.
That's a purely business question. You can put any number of vehicles in place to make that business happen. Absolutely. He's a fabulous physicist. He's got some really strong guys, and there's all sorts of great political landscape in the North, in Canada, to be able to make it happen. I would love to see it happen. He's got some great ideas. I think my team and we have some great ideas. I think it would work. Chemistry and physics have to work together in this case because, as Alvin Weinberg said, a molten salt reactor is one big chemistry plant. And I think that's the quote from his memoir. But it's true. And so I think it just would work really well.
Okay.
And so there's Kirk Sorensen is another, and he's got Flib Energy. I personally don't share the vision that he may have, but that's okay. That's fine. You know, that's the spirit of competition. So we'll see what happes.
And your website is
www.havealight.com. Actually, and my email address is there. The Weinberg Foundation is a foundation based out of the UK. They are proponents of thorium and molten salt reactors. I actually guest blogged on that. You haven't forgotten anything. I want to get the message out to whoever was going to watch this. Go teach yourself some chemistry. Break out, dust off your chemistry book, dust off your physics book. It's not as scary as you think. Particularly if you realize that at the end of the day, humans were doing it under very specific circumstances. And we can go look back in history and we can say, okay, this is the cool stuff and this is the screw ups. Okay? And so now we can make cooler stuff. And now and everybody can make money. And you know, free markets and everything, rock and roll. Like, yay. Let's just go do it. Let's just go do it.
We're going to look at some technical issues now. How does the grid actually operate? Starting over here, you have seasonal loading. I will actually move flexible AC transmission systems up into the north of our nation in the winter. I'll move them down to Florida in the summer to deal with those variable demands. From weeks to days, you will actually ramp your base load generation up and down gradually. On terms of hours to minutes, we have natural gas turbines and pumped hydro that we use to deal with these minute-to-minute demand variabilities. Getting on into like single seconds up to 60 hertz, you have issues such as power flow control, where I'm generating the same total amount of power, but it's being redirected to where the loads are in the grid on a second-by-second basis. You have such things as torsional interactions and sub-synchronous resonance that occur that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then you have at 60 hertz, I'm concerned with maintaining both my frequency and my reactive power within very tightly controlled bounds. And finally, as you go above 60 hertz, you run into issues with harmonics, which are introduced by many ugly loads, such as your arc furnaces, and even many power electronic systems actually will put a lot of these harmonics back on the grid, as we'll see. Okay, so how do transmission lines actually work? You have a voltage at each end of the transmission line. Between these two voltages, you're going to have a magnitude difference and a phase angle difference. And real power is concerned with the relative phase angle between the line and reactive power is concerned with voltage magnitudes. So as reactive power is passed along the grid, I will see the magnitude of my voltage drop, and as I proceed from my power plant to the far ends of the grid, I will see gradually increasing phase angle shifts. Now, a typical line will introduce a certain amount of reactive power depending on how much it is loaded. There is something known as a surge impedance limit. It is the optimal loading for a line. We build power lines and we determine the amount of power required. It is actually disadvantageous to simply build large excesses of power lines because under their surge impedance loading, they put a lot of reactive power back on the grid, causing voltages to rise. This can and does destroy things. Too much is just as bad as too little. Okay, and now let's look at some variations in power angles during a typical American day. Now you can see as the colors darken, that's your typical directions of power flow. So here in the Midwest, we'll have gusting and some wind production, and that typically is being transmitted out towards the East Coast. And we would like to have this entire grid much more tightly in the green area. We don't really like this massive variability. And for this cause, we're building large numbers, or we're trying to build large numbers of transmission expansion projects with significant resistance. Looking at the voltage or the frequency and how that changes, you'll notice in Oklahoma, which is a major area where we're deploying wind resources, not only when the wind gusts does the frequency surge above 60 hertz, but when the wind suddenly dies, the frequency dips below 60 hertz. The grid around this area is stable. Oklahoma experiences the most variability. Wind causes problems. Okay, so we're talking about all these renewables. Are there things we can do to the grid to integrate them? Well, we can increase line capacity. You can build more lines or compensate existing lines. You can regulate the lines constantly with rotating masses, flywheels. You can direct the power flows, and you can put other devices, okay, that will fix that. So this is an example of some studies I've done. This is a series capacitively compensated line. As you'll see, as I increase the line capacitance, I actually get more stable power flow. So I would compensate my line with 250 megavars, and I move the surge impedance limit down to a higher megawatt point. So the same line with a series capacitor on it carries more power effectively at a longer distance. But if you'll notice, there's a kind of extra frequency in there. You know, the uncompensated solution versus the more increasingly compensated solution. That's a concept known as sub-synchronous resonance. Now, what happens when sub-synchronous resonances line up with the resonance of a wind turbine, or with one of the many resonances of a wind turbine? The fan blades themselves will wobble. There's multiple rotating masses within these wind turbines. And indeed, if I have a lot of wind turbines in an area, if wind turbine 1 adds up with any of the resonances in wind turbine 2, plus the resonance of my series compensator, I'll get torsional amplification. This destroys things. You know, starting in the 70s, when they first started to interconnect large power systems, they found some pretty serious problems. It is very difficult to do the studies to detect this. And in fact, it is rarely done. I mean, when they put 500 megawatts of wind in Texas and forget to even build enough transmission lines to carry the power out of the area, I mean, this is far and above. So these are some of the proposed solutions. They have their advantages and their disadvantages. I can switch in reactances and capacitances. I can put in power electronics inverters. You can decouple your wind turbines and your solar plants with power electronics inverters, but these are very expensive systems. This is part of my research. The costs are high. I recently got to speak with a Department Energy Assistant Secretary, Pat Hoffman. I probably gave my professors a heart attack. This is right before I asked her when the Department of Energy will admit that wind and solar are probably not good solutions. But I had a candid conversation, got some interesting data out of her. There is not a single transmission expansion project in this country that's not currently being challenged by landowners. See how much a Texas cattle rancher wants you to pay for running a power line through his cow pasture. From Florida to California, distribution feeders are being overloaded due to home generation of solar energy. We're not storing it, it's just getting burned up. And if there's too much on it, then we simply shut parts of the grid off. And they're penalized when they do that. You know, you have reliable service providers being forced to accept unreliable inputs. They call renewable energy negative loads. Okay, and finally, many long lines in the Western Interconnect are currently being series compensated, so the torsional amplification issues are only going to increase. $10 trillion in transmission grid upgrades might allow us to start integrating some of these renewable power plants, and that's without a single megawatt being put on the grid.
Do direct current transmission lines avoid torsional amplification?
Yes, sir, they do, but they require power inverters. HVDC is an interesting concept. There's an issue with actually controlling the power flow. Typically in an HVDC line, I'll build my link that will have power flow available in one direction. So bidirectionality is currently being looked at. It can be built. People like ABB are doing it. It's expensive. A lot of the HVDC links are actually used to tie in different generation areas. We like to isolate, the East Coast from the West Coast, from ERCOT down in Texas, from SPP. And a lot of these solutions are simply expensive. If we had nuclear generation located where we needed it, we wouldn't even need a transmission grid. I mean, it's like you can spend a lifetime coming up with excellent answers to the wrong problem.
Could you go back to your frequency slide? Yeah, there you go, right there. I'm shocked that more advanced analysis hasn't been done. Fourier analysis combined with a $120,000 HP network analyzer should be able to deconstruct that overlay. That's an N-modal frequency distribution, right? And so how has that not been done yet?
Well, it's constructing the model. A single machine infinite bus model has like 27 modes I have to analyze, and that's assuming that the rest of the grid beyond my generator and the bus that it's connected to is just an ideal voltage source. I mean, we do transmission studies, but you talk about like it combinatorially explodes. I mean, this is like playing a game of Go for a computer. I mean, that's one of the very active areas of research, is how do we model grids effectively in order to determine, like, can I even put a wind turbine here? We're selling these things to poor folks in South America that don't have a clue what they're buying into. I mean, like, it's a shenanigan, par none.
Power system stabilizers were developed back in the 70s in order to counteract, the effects that we get when you have an SMIB model. That's a single machine infinite bus. So I have my my rotating machine at my power plant, and it's connected to a purely simplified model of the grid as an ideal voltage source. I can analyze the harmonics there, stabilize that system, and then, because every individual machine is pretty well stabilized, and you don't have two power plants all right next to each other. Doing that, we've developed a fairly stable grid, but all of a sudden comes all these additional rotating masses, all these small natural gas turbines, all sorts of windmill machinery. And so we really can't put DC links between all these individual devices in the grids. So what you do is you have wind farms, many of them, like in Oklahoma, that are now resonating with places like Dallas. And so you have resonances occur down these long transmission lines that's damaging major generation equipment in large cities in America. You have two different wind turbines that will resonate with one another across a transmission line. How do they even allow it? Because they haven't done the transmission studies. They don't have the grid modeled well enough to really determine that these things are going to happen. Like, why did we have major blackouts in the Northeast recently? You have fairly simplified grid models, right? You have inductances and resistances and capacitances of transmission lines, and you have models of transformers and things. Well, the transformer models they had were based on transformers when they were built. These things degrade over their lifetime. And who is out there constantly measuring the impedance of everything on the grid and updating our model? You know, our ability to predict behavior is limited by the models we use to do so. Now, admittedly, they're doing their best to try to, deploy synchrophasor measurement units everywhere along the grid. The Department of Energy is working very hard to upgrade our awareness in order to even plan the appropriate transmission upgrades. But it's the awareness itself is an extremely, it's not impossible, but it will take a huge amount of effort. Like, I take an RLC circuit. It has a certain number of resonances. I connect that to another circuit that has its own resonances. I will have both original resonances plus all the additional ones that come, because now I have a different circuit, right? Like, it's not just the thing itself, it is the thing in its environment. It's predictable certainly from the dispatchability, when will I know it will be generating, but also predictable from I'm putting one in an area and I have it fairly well modeled, and so I know that there's probably not going to be a bunch of interactions. But when I'm putting in hundreds of turbines, hundreds of rotating masses all over the place, they aren't doing the studies for these things. They're not even making sure that there's enough transmission line capacity there to even get the power out of the Texas Panhandle. I mean, these people are not doing their due diligence. They're under a huge pressure to put green energy out there, and they leave them shut off half the time, because when they get the thing up and running, it damages the local grid. It starts to burn the grid out. Feeders from Florida to Hawaii are being overloaded by home solar. And they've written the laws in such a way that the people want to put as much rooftop solar on the grid as possible. And now they're discussing taxing these people for putting power back on the grid. And no one understands why this is, oh, you hate solar energy. Why do you hate me? You're taxing me now. And it's like, sorry that you were getting they were basically stealing their neighbor's money. When you have a solar panel on your house, you're saying to your neighbor, hey, you owe me, you pay me whenever I want to get paid, and you give me power whenever I want it. And the money only flows one way, and it's wrong, it's stealing, it is stealing. The meter will still really only run one way. The solar panel just, in 99% of the cases, when the solar is coming in, my meter's simply not running as much. I mean, sometimes energy is put back on the grid, but that just kind of runs the meter backwards, right? Nothing is taken into account for time of use, nothing is taken into account for, what is the voltage level on the bus that I'm putting it on. I mean, if we could even integrate simple awareness like that to where I'm allowed to put solar energy back on the grid if the voltage is below a certain level and the frequency is below a certain level, then you could say at this point in time the grid could use some more power, sure. But we just don't have that level of awareness integrated. So what is a utility is an organization that is very much leashed by the government. utilities are not allowed to significantly profit, and they're also protected in case things go down. They answer to public service commissions in a lot of cases, and the Public Service Commission is a political organization that answers to what people are demanding. You know, John Bethel with the head chair of the Arkansas Public Service Commission, great guy, and I've talked to him, and he agrees with all the nuclear power stuff, but he's an elected official, and his job is to give the people what they want. And when the people are deceived and are demanding bad resources, they basically come up with the least bad scenario that allows a utility company to not go bankrupt completely. I mean,
how long has this awareness of the damage to the existing grid been around? Is this like something in the last few years now that we're starting to see?
The first time we really saw sub-synchronous resonance occur on the grid was when they started building power plants at coal mines and connecting them via long transmission lines to loads. So back in 70 and 71 at Mojave, they connected this power plant up to the grid, and like stuff starts shaking, and boom, the shaft of the turbine snaps, and they're like, what in the world? Did the hand of God come down and do this? What's going on here? And so they actually had to go back and do the studies and say, hey, some kind of frequency of vibration is going on here. And they looked at not just the turbine and its dynamics, they looked also at the dynamics of the local grid and the capacitively coupled line, and they're like, oh hey, if you series compensate a transmission line with a large capacitor, you can increase the amount of power it can transmit. But by adding a series capacitor, I'm also introducing a resonance, and if that resonance plus the resonances, any of the resonances of the rotating machinery add up to 60 hertz, they'll interact. And so that's the thing, is when you have multiple rotating masses, any combination of those rotating masses can add up to a resonance with a series capacitively compensated line.
Nuclear is the answer. The others simply can't meet that demand. But if we don't change the price of nuclear, we're going to be dominated by coal. And you're going to see 10 times as much coal as we have today.